Hey guys, tonight we venture into the kitchens of ancient Rome. Not the lavish banquet halls or wine-soaked feasts, but the quieter, cozier moments at the break of day. Imagine it now. A dim, flickering oil lamp casting golden shadows on clay walls, the faint smell of smoke and warm grain lingering in the cool morning air. Someone stirs, perhaps you, wrapping a woolen shawl across your shoulders as the household slowly wakes. You don't need an alarm clock. There are roosters for that. And trust me, they don't hit snooze. You stretch, blink, and realize you're hungry, but not ravenous. It's that subtle kind of morning hunger, a gentle emptiness. Breakfast, or ientaculum, as the Romans called it, wasn't about indulgence. It was about preparation. Fueling up before the day pulled you into duty, debt, or debate, and it usually wasn't a grand affair. You weren't diving into omelets or stacks of pancakes. This was a meal of simplicity, and maybe even surprise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull back a woven curtain that separates your sleeping corner from the rest of the domus. If you're fortunate, you live in a full Roman house with an atrium and maybe even a peristyle. If not, your apartment or insula creaks above the busy street below. Either way, the smells of morning begin to drift in. Ash, boiling grain, a hint of honey if the day's lucky. There's no formal breakfast table. Romans didn't line up with cutlery and napkins. In fact, most people took their breakfast standing, sitting on low stools or walking out the door. It was casual, efficient, and deeply woven into daily routine. But don't confuse casual with unimportant. The first meal was still a marker of class, of access, of rhythm. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Roman society didn't prize breakfast as highly as dinner, but ientaculum was widely practiced, especially among workers, children, and soldiers. It often took place at or just after sunrise. Those in higher social circles might skip it altogether, preferring to fast until the midday meal. But for most, skipping breakfast wasn't aesthetic. It was just impractical. You pad across the floor, bare feet cool on terracotta tiles. Someone is already boiling water in a bronze pot. You see a small loaf of panis, coarse, dark bread from yesterday, sitting on the counter. It's dense, not fluffy. Think less baguette and more brick. You tear off a chunk and chew slowly. It's dry. You dunk it in warm milk to soften it. Here's a quirky little detail. Some Romans added crushed herbs to their morning bread, especially in the countryside. Thyme, garlic, or even poppy seeds. It wasn't just for taste. It helped mask stale grain or add energy. One Roman text even jokes that breakfast bread needed its own helmet, which may have been less an exaggeration than we'd like. As you chew, the light shifts. Outside, someone's mule brays. You hear a distant merchant setting up shop, calling out his wares. A child somewhere whines about chores. Life, despite its marble monuments and epic poets, begins humbly, always. And now the first major question arises. Did Romans really eat breakfast consistently? Historians still argue whether the practice of ientaculum was universal or mostly observed by the working classes. Some elite sources downplayed breakfast as uncivilized, favoring the long, drawn-out prandium and cena. But archaeological evidence, including food remains and cooking tools, suggests that even wealthy households kept routines for early meals, even if they didn't write poems about it. You might smile here, maybe because the idea of someone scribbling, "Ode to my morning barley," feels absurd. Or maybe because you're beginning to understand how history works. What gets remembered isn't always what gets lived. You finish the bread and rinse your hands in a small basin. No soap, just cold water and maybe a splash of vinegar. A servant, if your house is one, cleans up the crumbs without fuss. The rest of the household moves into its rhythm. The cook checks on lunch preparations. A child practices Latin letters. You're satisfied. Not full, not stuffed. Just ready. Roman mornings were often quiet. Not serene exactly, but steady, measured. Even in the bustling capital, there was a kind of consensus. The day began with small gestures, a nibble, a sip, a grunt of acknowledgement to whoever handed you the fig. Breakfast wasn't performative. It wasn't shared on scrolls or shouted from rooftops. It was a private moment in a very public world. And somehow, that makes it feel more human. You look down at the last crumb on the table. The day will take you elsewhere, to forums, to farms, to lectures about stoicism you didn't ask for. But this was yours. Just a piece of bread. And a beginning. The bread still lingers faintly on your breath as you step into the day, but something else draws your attention now. Something warm and thick and gently bubbling in a pot nearby. It's pulse, the Roman porridge. Not quite oatmeal, not quite soup. It's somewhere between breakfast and survival. You dip a spoon into the mixture. It resists you slightly like wet sand, but gives way. The taste is earthy, a little bland. But if someone was generous this morning, there might be a dash of salt or a swirl of honey stirred through it. You can almost feel it sliding slowly down your throat. Not exciting exactly, but comforting, familiar, filling. Pulse was a staple across all walks of Roman life, made from farro or emmer wheat, grains that chew back a little. It was boiled until soft and eaten plain, or dressed up with whatever you had on hand. Chickpeas, crumbled cheese, even pine nuts, if you were celebrating something. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Long before Rome became obsessed with exotic imports and lavish courses, the earliest Roman diets were centered on pulse. So much so, in fact, that Roman soldiers were once nicknamed pultificoi, porridge eaters. The grain defined them body and empire-like. You settle onto a low stool in the corner of the kitchen. It's still dim, with shafts of light catching in the smoke. Someone fans the coals. The porridge thickens further as it cools. In a home like this, breakfast isn't just food. It's ritual. It's repetition. It's knowing that no matter how chaotic the rest of your day gets, this bowl will taste the same. There's an odd sense of comfort in that. Now, not everyone was lucky enough to enjoy pulse in its ideal form. In the poorer districts of Rome, it might be made from leftover bran, rough barley, or spelt, the kind that made your jaw ache. Some households boiled it with milk or wine. Others stretched it with water and hope. Here's a quirky little tidbit. In some rural communities, pulse wasn't eaten in bowls at all. It was poured onto flat clay surfaces and left to set into slabs, which were then sliced and eaten like soft bread. Less cleanup, more portability, and definitely more likely to confuse a modern brunch goer. You listen to the kitchen sounds, the scrape of bronze against clay, the dull thud of the lid, the gurgle of cooling stew. Someone mutters about needing more oil. Someone else is sharpening a knife. It's barely passed on, and already the day is waking up with 1,000 tiny noises. You notice that the porridge isn't just breakfast. It's a social leveler. While the toppings and bowls might differ, the foundation stays the same. A senator and a shepherd might both begin their day with a version of pulse, though only one might get to add imported dates or black pepper. Historians still argue whether pulse maintained its cultural significance as Rome evolved into a sprawling, decadent empire. Some say it became a nostalgic food, a nod to simpler, purer times. Others suggest it was quietly abandoned by the upper class in favor of more exciting flavors and textures. Either way, it never disappeared. You scoop another bite. It's thicker now, almost gummy. There's a smear of olive oil on top, catching the light. The oil is an extra virgin and definitely not cold pressed, but it does the job. You wonder briefly if anyone in the Roman Empire ever just hated pulse. You imagine a teenager in a tunic sighing, "Ugh, not porridge again." Some things transcend time. As the kitchen quiets for a moment, you take in your surroundings. The walls are darkened from smoke. Hooks hang from ceiling beams, some holding herbs, others iron pots. The floor is worn smooth in the spots where feet have stood stirring, cutting, scraping, waiting. Everything here feels softened by time and repetition. There's no clock, no ticking, no to-do list, just the next step in the routine. Someone cracks an egg into a pan for tomorrow's prandium. Someone else is kneading dough for the next round of bread. But for now, it's just you and this quiet moment with your bowl of warm, forgettable comfort. You think about how pulse is more than just food. It's a memory keeper. The kind of dish that carries centuries in its simple texture. The kind of dish no one ever writes a poem about, but everyone misses when it's gone. You finish the last bite. The bowl is warm in your hands. You don't need dessert. You don't need flair. You just need this. And maybe that's why Pulse lasted. Because in a world of triumphal arches, gladiator fights, and imperial intrigue, someone still had to start the day with a spoon and a little grain. The sun creeps higher, and you step outside, stretching your arms as a Roman street begins to stir. The smells of porridge and smoke linger faintly behind you, but new scents rise to meet your nose. Bread, wine, the sharp tang of vinegar, and something you can't quite place but which makes your stomach twitch again. Maybe it's time for panis. Roman bread isn't like modern bread. There's no fluffy sourdough or multi-grain baguette. What you get instead is dense, chewy, often slightly sour from the long fermentation, and baked in communal ovens that blacken the crust beautifully, while leaving the inside heavy and satisfying. You make your way to a street vendor carrying a basket of still warm loaves wrapped in linen. His cart wobbles with every step. He's selling panis quadratus, those famous circular loaves marked with deep ridges, so they're easy to break apart. You buy one, the crust still warm, the edges flaking off with each movement. Mainstream historical fact incoming. Panis quadratus loaves were so iconic that archaeologists found dozens preserved under volcanic ash in Pompeii. They even left impressions of bakers' stamps, branding Roman style. Imagine being so proud of your carbs that you literally stamp your name into them. You break off a piece. It's got weight to it. Crumbly, yes, but dense. Not everyone in Rome had access to white flour. Most bread was made with wholemeal spelt or barley, giving it a nutty flavor and a slightly gritty texture. It's not elegant, but it fills you up. This isn't snack food. This is morning fuel. The baker gives you a nod. His apron is dusty with flour. There's a little scorch mark near the hem. He tells you casually that he was up before sunrise shaping these loaves. In Rome, bakers don't get to sleep in. You take your bread to the side of a fountain. Sitting on a smooth stone ledge, feet dangling above the street, people pass, some already sweating in the rising heat, others still yawning. A little girl skips by with a fig in one hand and a lump of bread in the other. She waves. You wave back. Quirky little tidbit. Roman bakers often mix unusual ingredients into bread to stretch their supply. Ashes, sand, even bits of powdered bean or chalk. Not to poison you, of course, just to fill you. It wasn't uncommon for bread to taste different from one bakery to the next, depending on how creative or desperate the baker was feeling. You dipped the crust into a small cup of water wine, just enough to soften it. Romans rarely drank wine straight. It was always diluted, more like wine-flavored water than anything else. The flavor seeps into the bread, mellowing the sourness and making it easier to chew. Historians still argue whether the Roman diet was more nutritious than modern ones. On one hand, they ate far fewer processed foods and relied heavily on grains, legumes, and seasonal produce. On the other, food storage and sanitation were, well, let's just say, unpredictable. That cup you're holding probably hasn't been washed since Cicero was a boy. The bread is satisfying, and you find yourself eating slowly, rhythmically, like the morning itself. No one rushes you. This isn't a grab-and-go latte culture. You eat what you have, and then you move on. No to-go containers. No fraps. Just crumbs in your lap and a bit of sun on your face. You glance across the square and spot a stall selling libum, a kind of honey cheese bread offered at small family rituals. Today's batch is fresh. Pale rounds dusted with flour, steam still curling up from under the linen wrap. You consider buying one for later. Then you do. Why not? Breakfast is allowed to have dessert. The seller smiles. She wears a faded saffron scarf over her head, hands stained from a cheese. She tells you this batch was made with goat's milk and that the honey came from her cousin's hives near Tiber. You nod, even though you have no idea where Tiber is. You take a bite of the libum. It's rich and soft, like cake pretending to be bread. The honey hits first, sweet but floral. Then the cheese hums quietly underneath. You close your eyes for a second. You're not meditating. You're just letting your brain catch up to the flavor. Down the street, you hear a cart rattling over stones. Someone shouts about needing more firewood. A dog barks at a pigeon that refuses to move. The city breeze stretches, begins again. The Romans didn't have breakfast as we know it. Their ientacum was a quiet, piecemeal affair. Some bread, a cup of wine, maybe some leftovers if you were lucky. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't scheduled. It just happened whenever you were hungry, whenever there was food, whenever the day told you it was time. You imagine a Roman senator biting into a wedge of cheese while reading dispatches, a mason chewing bread with his hammer still in hand, a priest offering honey cakes to a household god, then sneaking one for himself. Morning was functional, No omelets, no pastries, just the simple joy of having something to chew on while you face the day. You finish your bread. Your fingers are sticky from honey. You wipe them on your tunic and smile. That's breakfast Roman style. A little rough, a little sweet, and just enough to get you moving. As you brush crumbs from your lap, the city of Rome begins to buzz in earnest. Hooves clatter, shop shutters swing open. Somewhere, a vendor shouts about fish that may or may not still be breathing. You decide to walk the long way, past the Subura, that famously chaotic neighborhood known for its noise, smells, and general sense that anything could happen, including breakfast. Your sandals scuff against cobbles slick with morning dew and who knows what else. The air is thicker now, not hot, but warming. You breathe in the mix of humanity and herbs, dust and dates, bread and sweat. Welcome to the olfactory-themed park that is Rome before noon. And speaking of interesting breakfasts, remember that the ancient Romans had a peculiar relationship with leftovers. What we might consider dinner food could easily show up at the morning table. Chickpeas, lentils, olives, cold meat, boiled eggs, all fair game. The Romans weren't big on food categories. If it fit in your mouth and didn't kill you outright, it was breakfast material. You pass a man hunched over a shallow bowl, scooping up lentils with a piece of barley bread. The lentils are spiced, maybe with coriander or cumin. Romans loved strong flavors, bold herbs, fermented sauces, sharp cheeses. Nothing was bland. Even breakfast had attitude. Mainstream historical fact. Romans often flavored even the simplest meals with garum, a fermented fish sauce that makes modern anchovy paste seem bashful by comparison. Think soy sauce, but salter, fishier, and capable of knocking out a small room if spilled. It was everywhere, on bread, on beans, in wine if someone was playing a prank. The ancient equivalent of putting sriracha on literally everything. You stop by a small food stall under a faded red awning. The owner is slicing hard-boiled eggs with a bronze knife, arranging them neatly beside olives and slices of cheese on a terracotta tray. He nods at you, offers a piece. The egg yolk is dry but earthy, and the cheese is crumbly with a slight kick. Sheep's milk, you think. Maybe goat. You pretend to know the difference. There's vinegar to dip into, sharp, sour, cutting right through the fat. It's all simple, but somehow satisfying. You can see how a Roman soldier might eat this, squatting beside a road somewhere, using a rock as a plate. Quirky tidbit. Some Romans seasoned their morning food with ashes or charred herbs, believing it would purify the stomach. Kind of like drinking green juice in modern times, but crunchy. The line between breakfast and medicine was often fuzzy. One person's appetizer was another's folk cure. You walk on, past murals of cupids and dolphins, their paint flaking in the heat. A boy darts past holding a fig in one hand, and what looks like a grilled mouse on a stick in the other. You pretend you didn't see that. Not because it's gross, although yes, but because you're trying to stay in the breakfast lane for now. You find a shaded corner near a bakery where someone has set out trays of small honey-coated treats. These aren't exactly breakfast, but the line is blurry. They're called globuli, deep-fried balls of dough, sometimes stuffed with cheese or dates, always soaked in honey. Breakfast? Dessert? Yes, you buy two, because when in Rome, historians still argue whether breakfast was truly important to Romans or just an afterthought. Some sources suggest it was a quick, necessary pause before real business began. Others hint that it was a sacred part of the day, especially for priests or philosophers who used the quiet hours for rituals and reflection. One thing's clear. While Romans didn't obsess over breakfast like we do today, they still knew how to enjoy it. As you chew your sticky globuli, a priest passes carrying a small tray of offerings, bread, fruit, maybe incense. He stops by a small household altar tucked into a wall, murmuring something as he lights a cone of resin. The smell blooms instantly, sweet, piney, just a bit smoky. Ritual and breakfast, side by side, sometimes even tangled. You remember what Pliny the Elder supposedly said, that figs, eaten early in the morning, made the body resilient and the mind sharp. That's the Roman mindset for you. Eat well, live long, and smell good doing it. You pass a row of shops now, each selling variations of the same humble goods. Olives in clay jars, wheels of cheese wrapped in leaves, hard biscuits for soldiers, rows of dates strung like beads. You could make 100 different breakfasts from these ingredients alone. None of them resemble what we'd eat today, but each with its own dusty charm. Somewhere nearby, a philosopher is giving a speech to no one in particular. His toga is rumpled. His audience is a cat, but his voice rings out all the same, quoting Cicero about the moral dangers of soft bread and overripe peaches. You roll your eyes gently, because let's be honest, Roman breakfast wasn't glamorous. It was whatever you had lying around. It was frugal, functional, sometimes funky, but it was also grounding. In a city of chaos and change and emperors with short tempers, a handful of olives or a slice of cheese could mean a moment of calm. You find a bench under an olive tree, gnawing the last bite of your honey cake. The sky above is a perfect pale blue, the kind that never seems real. Birds hop between rooftops, chasing crumbs. Someone nearby hums a tune that might be older than the forum. Your stomach is full or full enough. You're not stuffed, but you're satisfied. Roman breakfast has done its job, not with fanfare, but with the quiet reassurance of bread, oil, fruit, and patience. You close your eyes for just a moment, feeling the city buzz around you, and somewhere in that hum, beneath the arguments and footsteps and wheezing carts, there's a whisper contentment, like the sigh of a baker who's finally sold the last loaf. You stretch your arms and leave the shade of the olive tree, wandering deeper into Rome's arteries. By now, the city is fully awake, streets bustling with vendors, senators, beggars, scribes, and their trusty sidekicks, the ever-present pigeons. Cart wheels creak. A boy drops a basket of pomegranates. An old woman swats at flies with the fervor of a gladiator in training. Your feet carry you toward a quieter part of the city, a neighborhood that smells like ink and clay and occasionally goat. You pass a modest domus, a wealthy household, but not showy. There's ivy creeping along the walls and a tiled roof that glints in the light. Through an open doorway, you glimpse a table set with simple breakfast fare. Cheese, flatbread, dried fruit. A servant places a ceramic jug, probably watered wine, or maybe Posca, right at the center. No forks, just fingers and maybe a spoon. One mainstream historical fact: Romans didn't really use forks the way we do. Fingers were perfectly respectable for most meals, with the occasional spoon tossed in for liquids or eggs. In fact, for breakfast, most people didn't bother with utensils at all. A piece of bread became your scoop, your napkin, and your final bite. Efficient, slightly messy, and oddly satisfying. Your thoughts drift to how Roman households function at the breakfast hour. The the paterfamilias, head of the household, might have already left to sit in on court proceedings or meet clients. The matron might still be in the atrium, lighting a lamp or praying at the household shrine. Slaves would have been the first up, of course, lighting the morning fire, fetching water, slicing figs with steady hands. In one villa, you spot a young girl balancing a basket of eggs and herbs. A small dog trots behind her like a fluffy shadow. Her tunic is linen, her belt tied just slightly crooked. She pauses to dip her fingers into a bowl of olive oil, brushing it onto the flatbread before adding crushed garlic and a handful of fresh thyme. No toast, no jam, but definitely flavor. Quirky tidbit. Some Roman families believed eating garlic first thing in the morning warded off evil spirits, indigestion, and annoying neighbors. Not necessarily in that order. It also made your breath heroic enough to clear a room, which was possibly part of the strategy. You move along, the path now sloping slightly upward. The sun is warm on your back, and the city begins to spread out below. Terracotta roofs, temple spires, scattered laundry catching the breeze. In the distance, smoke curls from a bakery chimney, mingling with the scent of warm dough and toasted grain. You follow like a cartoon character in an old animated short, floating on the scent. When you reach the bakery, it's hopping, not a sleek storefront, but a soot-smudged hole in the wall with a line of patrons clutching copper coins. Inside, a man with arms like cured hams pulls flatbreads from a domed oven, using a paddle the size of a garden spade. The breads are crisp around the edges, pillowy in the center, some topped with onion or date paste, others plain and still steaming. You press closer. A woman beside you munches a piece of sweetened bread glazed with honey and sprinkled with sesame seeds. She offers you a bite. You hesitate just for form and accept. It's warm and fragrant, the honey leaving faint streaks on your fingers. Romans didn't do breakfast sweets the way we do, but a little sugar in the morning? Timeless. Historians still argue whether these bakery treats were reserved for special days or sold as everyday street food. Some say they were made for the wealthy and distributed as charity. Others argue they were the ancient version of a grab-and-go croissant. What's clear is that Romans had options and appetites. You notice a teenager handing out triangular parcels wrapped in fig leaves. Inside, cheese curds mixed with herbs and pepper, lightly aged and just funky enough to make you question your life choices. But it works. The leaf keeps it all tidy, and the cheese is oddly perfect with a bit of warm bread. You chew slowly, soaking in the shade of the bakery arch. Nearby, two philosophers are locked in what sounds like a passionate debate over whether barley bread is superior to wheat. One is quoting Seneca. The other, suspiciously drunk for this hour, is holding up his breakfast roll like it's evidence in a trial. You suspect they'll end up agreeing on nothing, but finishing the loaf together anyway. As you turn away from the bakery, you pass a scribal school. A group of young boys recites passages from scrolls. While chewing on figs, one of them has smeared ink on his chin. Another is trying to hide a boiled egg beneath his tunic. The teacher pretends not to notice. Breakfast and education, sometimes happening at the same time, especially when there's only one table. You stroll toward the edge of the district, where the scent of civilization begins to fade into hay and livestock and morning dust. A farmer on a mule nods as he passes, his pack filled with fresh herbs and maybe yesterday's barley porridge in a gourd. He takes a swig, grimaces, and mutters something about his wife's cooking. You smile and step aside to let him pass. You notice how many foods in Rome were portable, packable, and slightly fermented. Hard cheese, stale bread, olives, and fruit all traveled well. The Roman Empire didn't just conquer by sword, it conquered by picnic. As you wander back toward the city center, you take stock of your morning meals. A little bread, a little cheese, some honey, some vinegar, a lot of curiosity. There was no one Roman breakfast, no single ideal plate. What Romans ate depended on their class, their work, their region, even their beliefs. But across the board, they ate with intention. Not always plenty, but rarely waste. You round a corner and hear laughter. Two older women peeling chestnuts and complaining about their sons. One tosses you a nut with startling accuracy. You catch it midair, thank her, and crack it open with your teeth. It's warm and mealy and surprisingly satisfying. That's the thing about Roman breakfast. It doesn't wow you with grandeur. It doesn't promise to make you skinny or rich. It's just food, humble, grounding, and made by hands that knew the value of a quiet morning meal. You sit again, this time on a stone step warmed by the sun. The city clatters onward, but you feel full, not just in your belly, but in your mind. Rome has shared a secret with you, and it tastes like olives, honey, thyme, and time itself. The sun climbs higher now, casting sharper shadows between buildings and curling the edges of parchment nailed to wooden posts. Announcements, fines, lost dogs, or maybe a performance happening 3 days too late. Rome keeps moving, and so do you, brushing crumbs from your tunic and wondering who's still eating breakfast at this hour. You take a left near the Temple of Vesta, where the air smells faintly of ash and laurel. There's something solemn about this part of the city. Less shouting, more murmuring. You walk carefully on smooth marble slabs, passing quiet courtyards where columns stand like guardians of forgotten breakfasts. You pause before a statue of a goddess, holding wheat in one hand, a torch in the other. She looks perpetually unimpressed. You give her a respectful nod and move on. One mainstream historical fact. While most Romans had a simple breakfast called ientaculum, wealthier households sometimes stretched the definition. In villas across the empire, a lavish breakfast might include spiced wine, fresh oysters, yes, really, eggs, mushrooms, smoked fish, even stuffed dormice, if you were feeling adventurous or just had something to prove to your guests. The richer you were, the less your breakfast resembled what any sane person would call morning food. You didn't just break your fast. You demolished it, with silver cutlery and servants in tow. You pass under an archway into a courtyard shaded by vines. A servant walks by carrying a tray of steaming mushroom broth, the steam curling like perfume in the air. On another tray, you spot pear slices drizzled with a sticky dark syrup. Probably defrutum, boiled grape must reduce until it's thick enough to glue your teeth together. Breakfast for the 1%. There's a philosopher slumped on a marble bench, swirling a cup of honeyed wine and muttering about moral decline. He hasn't eaten, you suspect, but not for lack of opportunity. He's fasting, probably, or making a point, or both. Quirky tidbit. Some elite Romans believed that skipping breakfast helped them concentrate, made them more virtuous, or even more desirable. Others, perhaps more relatable, simply like to sleep in and call it philosophical discipline. You wonder how many fasting philosophers had secret stashes of cheese under their togas. A girl tiptoes past with a tray of pastry stuffed with dates and pine nuts. You pretend not to stare. She notices anyway and offers one with a grin. You take it, whisper a thank you, and sink your teeth into the flaky crust. It's not breakfast food, not really. But then again, in Rome, it kind of is. Historians still argue whether these extravagant breakfasts were reserved for special occasions, or some households indulged daily. It's possible that, for Rome's upper crust, breakfast was both a performance and a habit, an edible display of wealth, taste, and culinary bravado. In a culture where reputation was currency, breakfast could be a brag. You stroll toward the edge of a peristyle garden, where citrus trees grow in tidy rows and fountains babble like well-fed infants. A senator stands near one, dipping bread into a bowl of fish pate while dictating letters to a tired-looking scribe. His breakfast? Practical, salty, and probably stolen from his own banquet leftovers. Another man, younger and flashier, sits nearby with 2 roasted quails and a plate of pickled onions. It's barely mid-morning, but he's already arguing politics with a friend who's halfway through a cup of cinnamon spice wine. Their conversation is loud, confident, and slightly tipsy. And you find yourself nibbling a fig someone left behind on a marble step. It's perfectly ripe, bleeding juice down your fingers. You suck the sweetness from your thumb and wonder how anyone ever returns to plain toast after this. You follow a path of crushed shells and pebbles leading to the villa's kitchen, a smoky, chaotic wonderland of clanging pans, shouting cooks, and a small pig trying to escape its fate. The air is thick with rosemary, garlic, and hot oil. A boy flips tiny pancakes made of ground barley and goat milk. He dusts them with poppy seeds and slides them onto a plate. You catch his eye. He raises one eyebrow. You hold up a coin. He shrugs and passes you the smallest cake. Still warm, slightly chewy, earthy with a hint of something floral. You chew slowly, watching him crack eggs into a wide bronze pan, yolks bobbing like little suns in a sea of bubbling oil. You think about the logistics of Roman kitchens. Most didn't have the kind of space or fuel for full meals in the morning. Fires were expensive, after all, and bread could be bought from bakeries cheaper than making it at home. But if you had the staff, the space, and the money, you could eat like a god before noon. You leave the villa just as a musician begins tuning a lyre in the corner. Music with breakfast? That's how the Romans did brunch, apparently. Back on the street, the noise returns in waves. Hawkers, priests, street kids playing with knuckle bones. You pass a man frying what looks like pancakes over a tiny charcoal brazier. He's squatting low, his sandals worn thin, flipping each cake with stick. He offers you one, nodding silently. You accept. This pancake is different, coarser, maybe made with millet or spelt. It's not sweet, but it's warm, satisfying, real. And just like that, you're reminded that Roman breakfast wasn't always indulgent. Sometimes it was just fuel. Simple, earnest, and enough. As you walk again, your hands sticky with fig juice and honey, you hear someone reciting poetry, maybe Ovid or Horace, probably from memory. Their voice fades as you turn down a side alley toward a public bath. The day is beginning to heat up, and the thought of cool water is more tempting than another bite. You pause, though, because just outside the entrance, there's a man selling walnuts and grapes, the oldest breakfast duo in Roman history. You buy a handful, cracking the shells open on a nearby step and savoring each bite. And in that moment, with grape juice on your tongue and the distant sound of water trickling through pipes. You feel like you've been let in on something ancient and precious. That breakfast, whether opulent or humble, whether eaten alone or with half a dozen senators, was always something more than food. It was rhythm. It was ritual. It was Rome. You're stepping away now from the polished villas and mosaic tile courtyards, deeper into the back streets of Rome, where marble gives way to mud brick, where the smells grow stronger, more garlic, more sweat, more life. This is where most Romans lived. And it's here, between leaning insular walls and laundry lines, that breakfast took on its truest, humblest form. Down a narrow alley, you pass a taberna, just opening for the day. The wooden shutters creak upward, revealing shelves lined with terracotta bowls and a man wiping down the counter with a cloth that's doing its best. He nods at you, half awake, and gestures to a pot bubbling over a clay stove. It's pulse, a staple porridge made of farro grain, thick, grayish, hearty. He ladles them into a chip bowl and hands it over with a spoon that's seen better decades. You sit on a stone ledge and take your first bite. It's bland, like really bland, but you're also oddly comforted by it. A food that doesn't ask much of you, doesn't try to impress, just quietly fills the gaps in your stomach and your soul. Maybe add a sprinkle of salt, a drizzle of oil if you're lucky. But honestly, this porridge isn't about flavor. It's about getting on with your day. One mainstream historical fact: most Roman citizens, especially those in the working class, didn't have time for elaborate meals. Ientaculum was often whatever they had on hand. Some olives, cold leftovers flatbread, or this very porridge. It wasn't about indulgence. It was survival with a side of routine. The streets hum with morning activity now. Vendors shout, donkeys bray, and someone somewhere is already regretting last night's wine. You keep walking, passing women carrying jugs of water balanced on their shoulders, boys chasing chickens, and an old man muttering about cabbage. Here's a fringe tidbit. Roman kids, like kids anywhere, were notoriously picky eaters. Pliny the Elder once noted that some children refused porridge unless it was flavored with honey or fruit. Spoiled? Maybe. Or maybe they were just the original oat milk latte generation. You follow a group of laborers toward a construction site. They're eating on the go, chewing flatbread dipped in vinegar or gnawing on dried figs while tying sandals or hammering nails. One man has a pocket full of lupin beans, salted and peeled as he works. Breakfast and labor blur together here. No one's sitting. No one's talking much. But there's a rhythm to it all, and food is part of the beat. Historians still argue whether ientaculum was ever truly mandatory, or some Romans skipped it altogether. It likely varied by class, region, and even fashion, just like today's breakfast trends. You can almost imagine the headlines. Is skipping porridge a new Stoic lifestyle, or 5 reasons elite Romans say no to morning meals? The neighborhood opens up slightly as you reach a public market. The smells intensify. Grilled onions, smoked fish, fruit starting to turn the sun. A baker pulls long loaf from a communal oven. Their crusts cracked and golden. People line up with woven baskets, trading coins or favors for slices. You get in line, mostly for the smell. When your turn comes, you ask for the end piece, still warm. The baker gives it to you with a grunt. That means, don't talk to me until I've had my wine. You nod in silent agreement. You stroll with your bread, tearing small chunks and savoring the heat. You dip into a bit of cheese curd shared by a woman selling garlands nearby. She insists, saying you look underfed for a god, which is either a compliment or a warning. You take the cheese. Around the corner, you spot an apothecary opening shop. Jars line his shelves, dried herbs, strange powders, little bundles of what you hope is not lizard tail. He's mixing something in a bronze mortar, and you catch the scent of fennel, honey, and vinegar. Morning tonic. He says, seeing your interest wakes the gut or ruins the day, depending. You smile politely and pretend to sip the invisible drink. He chuckles. You'll be back. The streets narrow again as you reach the Inslee, Rome's towering apartment buildings. Rickety, fire-prone, always one cough away from collapse. You pass through a darkened arch and emerge into a small courtyard cluttered with drying linens and coiled ropes. Here, breakfast is almost invisible. A mother crushes lentils into a paste while balancing a toddler on her hip. A man chews dried apple slices while sharpening a blade. No one calls it a meal. It's just life. And yet, there's beauty here, a sense of shared breath of daily rhythm, of people waking, eating, moving, surviving. You sit for a moment near a well, watching a pigeon strut across the cobblestones like it owns the place. A boy nearby feeds it crumbs from his pocket. You wonder how long those crumbs have been there. You decide not to ask. There's a smell now, sweet, smoky, a little mysterious. You follow it until you find an old woman roasting chestnuts over a tiny flame. She hums a song you don't know, but instantly like. She doesn't speak, just hands you a few chestnuts wrapped in fig leaves. You nod your thanks. You crack one open, soft, warm, slightly nutty. Somehow, it's the best thing you've tasted all day, not because of the flavor, but because it was given freely. You lean back against the wall and watch Rome breathe. And in that moment, surrounded by smoke and stone and soft morning light, you realize that Roman breakfast, humble or rich, stale or fresh, was never just about food. It was about the beginning of something. It was about finding a way to greet the day, even if all you had was a crust of bread and a fig leaf. You're crossing the river now, slowly, over one of the old stone bridges that arches across the Tiber like the spine of some sleeping beast. The water glints gold in the morning sun, lazy and thick, carrying stray leaves and the occasional fishhook on its surface. On the other side lies another slice of Roman life, a little quieter, a little greener, but just as hungry. You stroll past fishermen hauling in their morning catch, small wriggling things that smell like wet coins and seaweed. One of them sits beside a basket of eels, grinning with exactly 3 teeth. He offers you one, not the eel, just a hard biscuit from his pouch, the kind you could build a wall with. You accept it anyway. Hunger trumps dental safety. Up ahead, the road splits into a patchwork of fields, bakeries, and villas. Suburban Rome, if you will, where people still call it the city, but the air smells faintly of lavender and sheep. You pass a small roadside shrine where someone's left a cup of milk and a wedge of honey cake as an offering to the household gods. The milk's still warm, the cake's missing a corner. You decide not to ask questions. One mainstream historical fact: religion and daily life in Rome were thoroughly entangled, and breakfast often included rituals, offerings to Laura's household gods, Penedes, guardians of the pantry, or even spirits of the ancestors. You didn't just eat. You paid respects, lit incense, mumbled a few words of whoever you hoped was listening. Breakfast could be a spiritual act, especially when the food was scarce and the gods felt a little too quiet. A villa looms ahead, elegant but understated, its gardens buzzing with bees and sleepy-eyed servants. The cook here is already at work, grumbling as he grinds poppy seeds into a ceramic bowl. A girl slices dates with a blade no bigger than a thumbnail. Their breakfast? A barley cake soaked in warm wine, topped with crushed walnuts and a drizzle of fig syrup. Rich, sticky, and not for the faint of heart. A fringe tidbit. Some Roman recipes included ingredients meant to balance the humors, ancient medical beliefs that govern diet, mood, even personality. Feeling sluggish? Eat something hot and dry. Anxious? Cool and moist. It was less food pyramid, more culinary horoscope, and doctors had very strong opinions about whether you should eat onions at sunrise. Spoiler, usually no. You wander through the garden, plucking a sprig of mint from the hedge and rubbing it between your fingers. The scent is sharp, refreshing, like a reset button for your nose. There's a servant nearby sprinkling rose water on the stone path, not for cleaning, just for the pleasure of scent. A breakfast of senses. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite genuinely believed in the medicinal power of morning meals, or it was simply one more excuse to eat lavishly and justify it to their physicians. Either way, a breakfast that doubled as a health potion was definitely on trend. You step into the villa's portico, where the family is seated on low stools, eating in near silence. A father dips crusty bread into a bowl of lentil mash, while his son pokes at a soft-boiled egg with exaggerated suspicion. The mother, elegant in a saffron stola, sips goat milk from a silver cup and eyes the horizon like it about to deliver scandal. The smell of rosemary roasted chestnuts floats through the corridor, chased by a slave carrying a smoking pan and an expression that says, "I haven't slept since Caligula was born." You let him pass. Further in, a scribe reads aloud from a scroll, something about Cato the Elder and the virtues of cabbage. Everyone ignores him, except the youngest daughter, who rolls her eyes with the enthusiasm of someone born a few centuries too early for sarcasm memes. You find your way to the rear garden, where an old woman sits on a stone bench weaving herbs into a garland. She smiles and pats the seat beside her. You sit. She pulls a flat cake from her pouch, dense, nutty, still warm, and breaks it in half. No words, just shared bread, birdsong, and the distant hum of bees. You chew slowly, letting the flavors unfurl. Hints of anise, maybe a trace of orange peel. It tastes like something remembered from a dream. And that's when it hits you. Roman breakfasts weren't static. They shifted with the seasons, the classes, the moods of the gods, and the contents of your coin purse. They could be hurried or holy, extravagant or elemental. And sometimes they were nothing more than a quiet moment with someone who gave you half a cake. A donkey brays in the distance, breaking the spell. You stand, brush the crumbs from your lap, and bow slightly to the old woman. She chuckles and waves you off like she's seen 1,000 curious wanderers before, and maybe she has. Back on the road, you pass olive trees heavy with fruit, their shadows dappling the dusty path. A boy skips stones across an irrigation ditch, laughing when one finally bounces 3 times. He stops to snack on a clump of raisins, offers you some, then skips away. You pop a few into your mouth, and they're sweet, sun-warm, and just the right amount of chewy. A tiny breakfast, but meaningful somehow. You keep walking, letting the road and the morning carry you forward. And all the while, Rome continues behind you. Cooks shouting, priests blessing, children eating with dirty hands and enormous appetites. Each bite, each smell, a thread in the tapestry of daily life. And breakfast? Breakfast is the anchor, the quiet moment before the storm. Or sometimes the storm itself, served with a side of cheese and judgment. You find yourself now at the threshold of a bathhouse, not quite lunchtime, not quite crowded, just early enough that the halls echo slightly with the sound of sandals slapping against damp mosaic. Rome's famous thermae aren't just about getting clean. They're social spaces, political arenas, gossip mills, and, if you're lucky, a place to snag a bite. Inside, the steam hangs like warm fog. You pass marble columns slick with condensation and catch glimpses of men oiling their arms, debating sports, or loudly claiming to have invented garum. Spoiler, they didn't. But you're not here for a soak. You're here because someone told you about the snack seller who sets up near the caldarium. He's there, already unwrapping little bundles of food on a slab of stone. Fig pastries, almond cakes, and a bowl of something brown and crunchy that he calls breakfast nuts. You're pretty sure that's not a real term, but he's already handing you a fig wrapped in grape leaf, and your mouth is too busy for questions. Mainstream historical fact. Roman bathhouses often doubled as food venues. Vendors roamed the outer courts and offered light snacks, especially dried fruits, cheese, and little baked treats, for those who come to sweat and socialize, but also sneak in a bite or two. Breakfast wasn't just something you ate at home. It followed you. The fig is sweet, deeply so. It tastes like sunlight got lazy and decided to settle inside a piece of fruit. The grape leaf, slightly tart, balances it out like nature's version of sophisticated food pairing. You sit beside the fountain and watch as a pair of older men play a game of dice nearby, each move accompanied by exaggerated groans and boasts. One of them eats dried plums between turns, the pits neatly flicked into a little ceramic cup, efficient, slightly gross, endearingly Roman. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some elite bathhouses included designated food halls where musicians performed during meals, often early in the day. Imagine eating honey-drizzled pastries while a man in a toga plays a lyre in D minor. Overkill? Possibly, but this is Rome. Go big or go to Gaul. A servant walks by with a tray of warm milk and a clay pitcher of date wine. You raise an eyebrow. Breakfast, he shrugs. Depends who you ask. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse breakfasts were considered decadent or just standard self-care. Some moralists complained that people were turning their morning routines into banquets. Others insisted that a fig and some bread were perfectly respectable pre-lunch fare. Even when eaten in a towel, you step into Frigidarium for a moment to cool down, because nothing says wake up like icy water and mild hypothermia. The air bites, but so does the hunger creeping back in. You wrap your toga tight and make your way out into the courtyard, where sunlight hits your face like an amphora to the forehead. Outside, you spot a trio of schoolboys lounging near a statue of Minerva. They're eating flatbread smeared with cheese and arguing about Virgil's metaphors. One of them accidentally drops a bit of his breakfast on the statue's foot and looks genuinely afraid that Minerva herself might smite him. You don't blame him. A woman nearby sells boiled eggs from a little cart, each egg tucked in a nest of straw, like a weirdly adorable appetizer. You buy one. It's warm, perfectly salted, and served with a twist of crushed herbs. You eat it slowly, watching a passing cloud that looks suspiciously like a gladiator helmet. There's a moment now, quiet, sun-drenched, where the noise fades and all you hear is the steady crunch of your egg and the soft cooing of pigeons picking at crumbs and cracks the street. Rome at rest, but it doesn't last long. Soon, the crowd thickens. Merchants hawk their wares, cloth, wine, perfumes, and children chase one another through the columns. A man with a cage of doves shouts something about fortune-telling breakfast birds. You don't ask. You're still recovering from the eel guy. You make your way toward the edge of the forum now, where breakfast gets political. Senators sip watered wine while reading scrolls. Philosophers munch hazelnuts and ponder fate. You spot a man dipping crusty bread into something thick and black. You ask. It's fermented fish sauce. You regret asking. Mainstream breakfast here? Anything but mainstream. What you're seeing is an edible expression of status, philosophy, and yes, flavor. A Stoic might stick to olives and water, while an Epicurean might snack on honey dormice if the mood strikes. Breakfast is identity. A fringe detail. Emperor Hadrian, known for being both cultured and slightly eccentric, reportedly enjoyed dried melon slices and wine-soaked pine nuts in the morning, which, honestly, sounds like trail mix from Mount Olympus. Historians still argue whether Rome's breakfast customs were uniform or wildly inconsistent across regions. What we know suggests variation not just by class or wealth, but by individual habit, local ingredients, and sometimes sheer weirdness. One man's breakfast was another man's offensive snack. You sit beneath a colonnade, watching the morning begin its slow transformation into noon. A man nearby crushes black pepper over a pear. Someone else bites into a radish like it owes him money. Across the plaza, a young girl eats dates out of a wax pouch. Her fingers sticky, her smile smug. You finish your egg. You stretch your legs. You take a breath and let Rome swirl around you. Its people, its pigeons, its poetry and peculiarities. Breakfast in ancient Rome, you realize, wasn't a meal. It was a moment, 1,000 moments. Different every day, different for everyone, yet somehow still unmistakably Roman. And as the sun climbs higher and the shadows retreat, you rise again, because the day has barely begun. You make your way now to one of the busier Roman streets, where breakfast is happening on the move. This isn't a land of leisurely garden meals or flute music echoing through marble halls. This is where people eat while dodging donkeys, sidestepping sewage, and shouting at their neighbors. Welcome to the street food breakfast scene. The scent hits you first. Roasted nuts, yeast from rising dough, and something vaguely smoky that might be either meat or misfortune. You round the corner and see a row of papini, tiny food stalls tucked into alcoves, run by vendors with quick hands and zero patience for dithering customers. At one, a woman with arms like amphories slaps balls of dough onto a hot griddle, turning them into warm flatbreads before your eyes. She tosses one your way, and it lands in your palm like a gift from the gods. Still steaming, chewy at the edges, it's sprinkled with salt and thyme. Simple, perfect, mainstream historical fact. Many lower-class Romans didn't cook their own meals at home, especially in the crowded insulae, apartment-style buildings often lacking proper kitchens. Instead, they bought food from street vendors, especially for breakfast. This meant that for much of the population, a hot morning bite wasn't made with love. It was made with speed. You take a bite and immediately understand why these stalls are popular. The bread is warm and satisfying, with just enough salt to make your taste buds sit up. Nearby, another vendor skewers small sausages onto wooden sticks, flipping them over open flame. He waves one at you, and because you are human, you take it. It sizzles in your mouth. Spicy, fatty, and completely illegal in at least 3 modern diets. You chase it down with a sip of watered wine from a clay cup, sold by a boy who might be 8 or 40. It's hard to tell in this light. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some Roman vendors sold breakfast items wrapped in vine leaves or parchment made from papyrus scraps, which means you accidentally read part of a discarded letter while eating your cheese roll. Imagine biting into your morning pastry and discovering a laundry list from a retired centurion. You wander along the street, where the food stalls start blending with workshops. A sandal maker chews on a hunk of goat cheese as he hammers nails into saws. 2 bricklayers share a small wheel of bread between them. Tearing off pieces with hands stained red from clay, you gnawed at them. They gnawed back. Nothing unites people like carbs. There's a child sitting on the curb with a fig in one hand and a lump of barley mash in the other. He's covered in dust and possibly grape juice. He waves at you with sticky fingers. You wave back with your sausage stick. Civilization in action. Historians still argue whether Roman breakfast customs followed strict norms or were more of an improvisational free-for-all. The evidence suggests a little of both. The elite like their routines. The common folk like their habits. But when it came to the first meal of the day, practicality often trumped decorum. You pause at a stall selling honey pastries shaped like fish. The vendor claims they bring luck. You raise an eyebrow, but you still buy one. It's crispy on the outside, soft in the center, and so sweet it makes your teeth sing the hymn of Jupiter. There's also a man selling something he calls poor man's eggs. Boiled lentils mashed with vinegar and herbs form into rough patties and grilled over hot coals. You try one. It's tangy, earthy, and weirdly addictive. You start wondering if you could make it home. Then remember you don't own coals or patience. Another vendor waves you over, holding up a cone made of woven reed, filled with toasted chickpeas. They crunch like tiny sun-baked marbles and taste faintly of olive oil and smoke. You buy a second cone before finishing the first. Someone nearby begins playing a reed flute. It's out of tune and off-tempo, but the mood is right. A couple dances half-heartedly in the dust, laughing between mouthfuls of breakfast cake. An old man joins in with clapping. You clap too, mostly because your hands are too greasy to put in your pockets. Mainstream fact again, the Romans prized variety, even in something as seemingly mundane as breakfast. While breakfast wasn't the most important meal of the day for elites, lunch or dinner usually stole that title. For the working class, breaking the overnight fast was essential, often their only quiet moment before a hard day's labor. You lean against a pillar and watch the street pulse around you. A seller chases a runaway piglet. A group of teenagers argues about wrestling matches at the arena. A cart rumbles by, spilling olives into the gutter. No one seems to notice or care. You take another bite of flatbread, now cold and slightly tougher, but still good. Around you, the noise builds, not chaotic exactly, but rhythmic. Life in motion. Rome waking up, stretching, yawning, eating. The breakfast crowd begins to thin as the day gets warmer. Vendors pack up. Customers shuffle off. A few linger, sipping the dregs of wine or finishing scraps of cheese, reluctant to face whatever comes next. A stray dog noses at a dropped pastry. You toss it a piece, and it trots away with the prize in its jaws, tail high, utterly victorious. You stand again, stretch, adjust your toga. You've eaten enough to carry you through another Roman morning, and maybe even part of the afternoon. Your hands still smell faintly of sausage and thyme. And as you rejoin the flow of foot traffic toward the Forum, you glance back once more at the now quiet stalls, their embers fading to gray, their tables bare. Breakfast in ancient Rome wasn't about sitting down. It was about grabbing life quickly with sticky fingers and empty stomachs, and tasting whatever had to offer before the sun got too high. And for you, that meant a hot sausage on a dusty street, and it was glorious. You meander away from the bustling street stalls now, belly full and fingers slightly oily. But you're not done yet. There's another side to the Roman breakfast table, or rather, breakfast mat, that you haven't seen, the villa life. You turn down a quieter path lined with cypress trees and the occasional passing goat, until it opens into the shaded courtyard of a countryside villa. Here, breakfast isn't just fuel, it's atmosphere, ritual, a slow unfolding of morning amid bird song and distant flute notes drifting lazily from somewhere indoors. This is where the wealthy wake up, slowly, dramatically, with silk sheets and household slaves tiptoeing around with trays. Breakfast in a Roman villa wasn't necessarily grand, but it was curated like a scented scroll. A servant approaches with a wooden platter, the grain smooth from years of use. On it, there's a small loaf of spelt bread, still warm from the villa's private oven. Beside it, soft cheese flecked with fresh herbs, a jar of fig preserves, and a dish of pressed olives glistening in golden oil. You can smell the rosemary from 3 feet away. Mainstream historical fact: Roman villas, especially those of the senatorial class, often had their own food production setups: bread ovens, dairy rooms, olive presses. So breakfast could be hyper-local, essentially farm to mouth. Long before Instagram made that flex, you're ushered to a shaded bench beside a small fountain. The water burbles politely while the rest of the world tries to catch up to the aristocrats. A slave boy offers you a fig leaf filled with crushed nuts and honey, sticky, fragrant, absurdly rich. You take a bite. It's dessert pretending to be breakfast. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some elite Romans would chew bay leaves or fennel seeds in the morning, not just for flavor, but because they believed it warmed the blood. One senator even had a superstition that eating basil at sunrise gave him prophetic dreams. Spoiler alert, it did not. You listen to a patrician couple argue softly over whether to have dates or melon. Their tunics are spotless. Their sandals look expensive, and their biggest decision before noon is whether to bathe before or after dictating letters. It's a different universe from the sausage stick survivalism of the city crowd. But despite the contrast, the food overlaps. Even here, the core ingredients, bread, cheese, fruit, remain consistent. What changes is the pacing, the serving where the presence of attendants to refill your wine cup before you even blinked. Also, fewer street dogs. You reach for a segment of pear soaked in spiced wine. Its flesh sweet and strangely smoky. It falls apart between your fingers. You look around and realize no one is in a hurry. Even the bees buzzing around the fig trees seem to be on break. Historians still argue whether the Roman villa lifestyle reflected typical elite habits, or was more of an idealized fantasy preserved in literature and mosaics. What's likely true is that some version of this leisurely morning did exist, though probably with more yelling about estate taxes than the statues let on. You wander into the peristyle, the open-air garden surrounded by colonnades, where another small table holds a dish of boiled eggs dusted with ground coriander and black salt. The eggs are warm, the salt sharp, and the coriander just fragrant enough to make you blink slowly, like a pampered cat. You didn't know eggs could taste like that. Someone offers you milk, either goat or something more exotic. It's served chilled in a clay cup, surprisingly refreshing, and a reminder that not everything about ancient breakfast was rustic. Sometimes it was just luxurious. Then there's the bread. Again, always the bread. But this one is studded with sesame seeds, baked with honey, and soft enough to tear without effort. You find yourself tearing into smaller and smaller pieces, not out of etiquette, but because each bite deserves its own tiny moment. In a corner, a slave gently fans a brazier where dried herbs smolder to scent the air. It's mostly lavender and something woodsy, probably juniper, possibly statice. You inhale slowly and feel your shoulders drop 3 inches. This, apparently, is what breakfast would be if you conquer Gaul and tax your tenants. Another servant walks by, holding a scroll. You glance over. It's a poem about the moon and garlic. You decide you don't want to know. You close your eyes and lean back, listening to the chirp of a distant bird and the faint tinkling of kitchen pottery behind a closed wooden door. The Romans believed breakfast should awaken more than the stomach. It should ease the body into the day like stretching into sunlight. And here, it works. You stretch out your legs and notice a dog curled up in a patch of sun, belly rising and falling like a slowly deflating wineskin. It twitches in its sleep, probably dreaming of leftover fish guts and aristocratic ankles. You relate, and as the sun lifts over the villa wall, casting long stripes across the marble, you feel something unusual, satisfied, not stuffed, not sluggish, just content. It's not the figs or the honey or the basil dreams. It's the feeling of a day starting gently, a whisper of civilization, a reminder that sometimes the world really can pause for breakfast. You stand, brushing crumbs from your tunic, and thank the household staff with a nod. They nod back, expressionless, efficient, eternal. Then you head out, past the pomegranate trees and the mosaic of Neptune flexing at a sea monster, because Rome has a weird sense of interior design. And as you rejoin the dusty road, you look back once more. The villa is glowing in the morning light, as if the sun itself approves of the cheese selection. Honestly, you get it. Now you're weaving through a quieter part of the city, past the chaos of street vendors and toward the gentle hum of the riverbank. It's still early, the sun not quite high, and the Tiber flows slow and reflective, like a sleepy mirror. You settle on a worn stone ledge and exhale. Here's where the scholars lived, where the wealthier families walked their dogs, while small wolves and breakfast got a little more thoughtful. This is a different kind of Roman morning. Less yelling, fewer crumbs, more olive trees, and slightly more smug neighbors. You spot a couple in togas, one adjusting his fibula clasp while munching on what looks like cheese-stuffed bread. Another man sits on a bench, sipping goat milk and reading a wax tablet with the air of someone who's about to make philosophy your problem. Mainstream historical fact. Among the Roman elite, breakfast orientaculum, could be a quiet, solitary affair. It often involved leftovers from dinner, cold meats, bits of bread, maybe olives, and a cup of watered wine or milk. It was meant to tide you over until prandium lunch, which was a more substantial midday meal. Some writers even skipped breakfast altogether, insisting it dulled the mind. But let's be real. Even Cicero probably got hangry sometimes. A servant nearby opens a wicker basket lined with linen and pulls out a small jar of honey. She sets it beside a platter of sliced figs and barley cake. The man she's serving doesn't even look up. He's too busy scribbling on his tablet. You imagine it says something poetic like, "Why does everyone ignore me when I quote Virgil?" Here's a fringe tidbit. One popular upper-class breakfast item was maridum, a kind of garlicky cheese spread mashed with herbs, salt, vinegar, and sometimes nuts. Imagine pesto got into a fistfight with ricotta and no one won. Roman poets even wrote verses about this stuff. It was pungent. It was proud. It could probably fight a cold on its own. You're handed a small crust of bread, slathered with it. Your nostrils flinch. Your eyes water. You take a bite anyway. It tastes like an herb garden lost a bet. But the cheese is creamy and the vinegar cuts through nicely, and you suddenly understand why a general might weep with joy at breakfast. You wander on, watching the domestic scenes play out. A young woman cracking eggs into a skillet over a brazier, a boy washing grapes in a clay bowl, an older man sneaking a date from a tray and pretending he didn't. The air smells like smoke, fruit, and warm flour. Historians still argue whether elite Romans viewed breakfast as a necessity or a weakness. Some sources describe it as a strategic fuel-up before work and politics. Others suggest skipping breakfast was a badge of asceticism or self-control, because nothing says power like denying yourself honey pastries. You duck under a portico where a tutor is feeding his pupils. They sit cross-legged on a floor mosaic, each holding a wooden tray with dates, bread, and little cups of milk. One child whispers something that makes the others giggle, and you wonder if Roman school gossip sounded just like today's. Probably. Did you hear Julius forgot his wax stylus again? Nearby, a scribe balances a reed pen in one hand and a wedge of cheese in the other. Multitasking Roman style, you pause at a marble fountain and wash your hands. A woman dips a jug into the water, then fills small clay cups for her family's breakfast. She smiles at you. Her robe is saffron yellow, her hair wrapped in linen, and her child clutches a barley biscuit like a sacred relic. It occurs to you that Roman breakfast wasn't flashy. It was intimate, sensible, and deeply personal. Whether you were gulping vinegar bread in the shop alley or nibbling figs beside a garden shrine, the ritual remained. Feed the body, calm the mind, start the day. The sun has climbed a bit now, casting gold over the rooftops. Shadows stretch thinner. Birds start poking around for crumbs. A dog barks half-heartedly in its sleep. Somewhere, a bell rings, probably a signal for workers to return to duty, or maybe just a goat who likes drama. You take a final sip of watered wine and brush crumbs from your tunic. The maridum is still on your breath, but you've decided that's fine. Let it linger. Let it announce your presence. After all, you just had breakfast like a Roman senator, and nobody can take that away from you. You're heading uphill now, the kind of slow, meandering climb that feels like you're walking into the sky. The streets get narrower, the buildings taller, the sounds of the marketplace melting into the quiet shuffle of sandals on stone. A soft breeze carries with it the scent of rosemary and ash, and the warmth of the sun settles into your bones like an old friend. This part of Rome is quieter, more reserved. You're in the residential zone of minor bureaucrats, scribes, tutors, and their very well-fed cats. The windows are smaller here, the doors worn smooth by generations of early risers. You pass a courtyard shaded by grapevines where a woman in a teal stola is brushing crumbs from a long table. A child balances precariously on a stool, stealing the last bite of his panis quadratus, that signature round, scored Roman bread that looks like it was baked to be divided evenly among squabbling philosophers. Mainstream historical fact. Panis quadratus, often carbonized and preserved in archaeological finds like those from Pompeii, was one of the most common forms of bread in ancient Rome. Bakers used string to score it into wedges before baking, making it easy to break apart. A practical design for both households and bakeries serving the masses. You watch as a man kneads dough on a slab of marble, his forearms dusted in flour, his sandals trailing white footprints across the stone floor. He hums as he works, something tuneless and rhythmic. Occasionally, he pauses to scatter fennel seeds across the dough. Apparently, Romans love their bread aromatic. You sit nearby, and he offers you a warm wedge, still steaming slightly from a clay oven tucked into the courtyard wall. The crust is thick and toasty, the inside chewy and tangy from wild fermentation. No butter, of course, but a drizzle of olive oil with crushed herbs does the trick. A teenage girl strolls by carrying a basket of small, cheese-stuffed pastries called libum. They look modest, but don't be fooled. These were once sacred offerings to household gods. Now they're just delicious, and still a great excuse to eat cheese for breakfast. Here's a quirky tidbit. One Roman breakfast sweet wasn't a pastry at all. It was pine nuts mixed with raisins and honey, sometimes pressed into little cakes and left overnight to set. Picture the energy bar your grandpa might have eaten. If your grandpa were a toga-wearing tax collector with strong opinions about aqueducts, you follow the girl into her home, where her mother is boiling lentils with garlic and herbs. It's late enough now that breakfast and lunch are starting to blur. She offers you a taste, and the flavor hits you like a warm hug. Earthy, savory, a little salty, and undeniably comforting. It's not breakfast cereal, but you'd trade a soggy bowl of flakes for this any day. Historians still argue whether the average Roman household actually had set meal times like modern ones. Some believe most Romans ate when they were hungry and the food was ready, not when a sundial told them it was polite. Others suggest that strict households, especially wealthier ones, enforce structured routines of meals, including a light, early morning ientaculum to start the day. You watch as more families begin to stir from behind curtained doorways. One man shuffles out bleary-eyed, his tunic rumpled. He accepts a crust of bread and a strip of dried fig with the enthusiasm of someone who definitely stayed up too late, reading Virgil. A young couple shares a pomegranate over their courtyard fence. She picks out the seeds with practiced fingers. He leans on a wall like a sleepy gladiator between shifts. Their laughter floats through the alley like music, and you get the distinct feeling that Romans were not above morning flirting when fruit was involved. You head farther up the hill now, where a cluster of rooftops offer panoramic views of the city. Clothes hang on lines, catching the sun. Terracotta tiles glow. Someone is frying onions, which seems aggressive for breakfast, but who are you to judge? You've eaten garlic cheese paste and survived. In a small garden terrace, You pause beside an elderly woman tending to herbs. She wears a saffron headscarf and a linen apron. When she notices you watching, she breaks off a sprig of mint and hands it to you with a smile that says, "This is better than coffee, trust me." You sniff it. She's right. Breakfast, for many Romans, wasn't something fast or portable. It was woven into the rhythm of the home, prepared slowly, shared generously, often eaten in courtyards or under shaded arcades. There were no toasters, no cereal mascots, no grab-and-go, oat bars, just whatever you had, made with what you could get, and flavored by time, sunlight, and salt. The sky is bright now, but not too hot. The bread guy waves at you as you pass. The girl with the cheesecakes disappears down a narrow street. The cup of the wall is still sharing fruit and bad jokes. And you, traveler in time and toast, are starting to feel full in the best possible way. You lean against a sun-warmed stone wall, mint still in your hand, crumbs in your pocket. Somewhere in the distance, a baker rings a small bell. Fresh loaves ready for delivery. The smell of fennel and flour drifts your way like a friendly ghost. You head downhill now, your steps slow and deliberate, your stomach still pleasantly full from too much bread and not enough shame. The sun casts soft shadows between columns and alleyways, and the city begins to hum at a new frequency. Less waking up, more getting on with it. But even as business and errands pick up, the scent of breakfast still clings to the air like perfume made from crumbs and olive oil. You wander toward a small shrine at the edge of a forum square. Not grand temple, mind you, just a tucked-away corner with fading paint and a statue of a household god who's seen better days. At the base, someone has left offerings. Not gold coins or ornate garlands. No, just 2 eggs, a small wedge of cheese, and a piece of barley bread. Mainstream historical fact. It was common in Roman households to leave food offerings to the Lars and Penates, the protective spirits of the home. These offerings were typically leftovers or symbolic staples like bread, wine, or fruit, placed near small domestic altars or public shrines to ensure luck, health, and general good vibes. The eggs look soft-boiled, nestled on a piece of cloth. One of them is cracked slightly, and the smell is more sulfur than sanctity, but it's the gesture that matters. You pause, bow your head just enough to not spill crumbs from your tunic, and then move on. Around the corner, a boy is running through the street, juggling a clay jug precariously. He's delivering milk. Goat. Probably, based on the bleeding protest from around the corner. He shouts something cheeky in Latin, but you're too sleepy to translate. Let's assume he said, "Good morning, fine time traveler, lovely tunic." In a nearby papina or street-side eatery, a few men are standing around sipping watered-down wine and tearing bread into soup. Yes, soup for breakfast. You might raise an eyebrow, but let's not forget, your great-grandparents probably ate hot porridge with bacon grease and didn't complain. One man dips a hunk of bread into a thick lentil stew and gestures you over. You take a seat on the stone bench, and he hands you a wooden spoon with all the ceremony of a priest at a sacrificial altar. The soup is smoky, salty, and surprisingly soothing, like liquid comfort. There's a hint of garlic, a ghost of cumin, maybe a bay leaf doing its best in the background. Quirky tidbit time. Some Roman cooks added bits of garum, their famously pungent fermented fish sauce, to breakfast stews. This was not considered strange. This was considered flavorful. That smell you're picking up? It's either umami brilliance or a crime against breakfast, depending on your modern palate. You take another bite, trying not to picture fermented anchovies. The man beside you raises his cup in greeting, then promptly sneezes into his sleeve. No one blinks. Hygiene, like flavor, had flexible definitions back then. Historians still argue whether working-class Romans ate their ientaculum at home or on the go. Some sources imply families prepared simple meals to be eaten together before heading out. Others suggest that for many laborers, a hot bite from a street vendor or a tavern was the norm. Fast food, ancient style, minus the paper napkins. You rise and continue down the cobbled street. Chickens dart out of your way, clucking like disgruntled commuters. A woman with flour in her hair waves you over to see her batch of morning pastries. She lifts the cloth covering a shallow basket, revealing small honey cakes made with ricotta and spelt flour. You take one. It's dense, sweet, and slightly sticky, the kind of thing that would crumble immediately inside a lunchbox but melt beautifully on a warm morning tongue. You thank her, and she shrugs with that universal expression of, "It's nothing," even though it clearly isn't. At the edge of the marketplace, a musician strums a lyre, his case open for coins. He sings a slow tune about love and olives, probably written for a girl who now sells cheese 2 stalls away. A dog lies beside him, head resting on a sandal, perfectly still except for the tail that thumps every time someone drops a fig into the lyrist's pouch. You sit for a while listening, chewing the last of the cake, and watching the rhythm of daily life pass in edible waves. Some kids walk by with slices of fruit wrapped in leaves. An old man is nibbling dry dates, his teeth working slowly, like gears in a vintage pocket watch. A young vendor slurps a weird barley and honey porridge that looks more like building material than food. And yet it all works. Somehow, in the heat and dust, the clamor and crumb trails, Roman breakfast manages to be both ordinary and oddly poetic. It's not flashy. It's not plated with parsley sprigs or Instagram filters. But it's honest flour, fruit, oil, and just enough sweetness to keep you from despairing about the lack of coffee. The square begins to empty out a little as midday approaches. Shopkeepers yawn, donkeys shuffle, a lazy breeze stirs a linen curtain, and you catch the last scent of rosemary and frying onions disappearing into the alleys. You stand, stretch your limbs, and start walking again. You drift into quieter side of town now, where gardens outnumber market stalls, and the smell of smoke gives way to warm soil and crushed leaves. A few bees hover lazily over thyme and mint bushes, and somewhere, someone's roasting chickpeas over an open flame. You think you might never be hungry again, and yet if someone offered you one more honey-soaked pastry, you wouldn't say no. Breakfast might technically be over, but that doesn't stop the Romans from continuing to snack. You pass a woman hanging laundry, simple linen tunics fluttering like ghostly birds in the breeze. On a stone ledge beside her, there's a small bowl of olives and a single figure. She waves with her free hand and nods toward the bowl. You hesitate, but hey, figs don't offer themselves twice. You bite in. It's soft and sweet, just a touch fermented, with that grainy interior like nature's jam. The olive's salty edge cuts through it perfectly. This, apparently, counts as a light post-breakfast refreshment. Mainstream historical fact. While the Romans did have designated meals, ientaculum breakfast, prandium lunch, and cena dinner, they also grazed throughout the day. Particularly in warm weather, small, scattered bites were common. especially among the working class, who didn't always have time for long sit-down meals. And food was never far away. Even in quieter corners, there were vendors with baskets of dried fruits or a clay pot of nuts resting by the door for guests. The culture of hospitality bled into every part of daily life. Even breakfast had its shadows lingering into the noon hours. A man rides past you on a mule, his robe billowing behind him like a deflated sail. Slung over his shoulder is a leather pouch clinking faintly. When he stops at the next house, he pulls from it not scrolls, but pastries. Of course, a deliver man for a bakery, peddling his wares door to door. The ancient Roman version of a croissant courier. Bless him. You watch him disappear down the path, and a thought strikes you. What if your breakfast wasn't just about filling your belly? What if it was about messaging status and a sort of edible public relations campaign? Historians still argue whether the upper classes used breakfast as a form of social performance. Was that early morning fruit plate a simple meal, or a signal of taste, wealth, and virtue? Some sources suggest elite Romans skipped breakfast entirely to appear more disciplined. Others think that hosting early morning nibble gatherings was a subtle flex. Come see my imported dates and perfectly trained cook. In the grand villas, breakfast could be both indulgent and oddly restrained. Imagine being offered quail eggs on polished silver, alongside a lecture on moral philosophy. Not exactly a casual Sunday brunch. You pass one such villa now, half shaded by tall cypress trees. Its mosaic floors just visible through an open doorway. Inside, a servant is arranging a tray with figs, boiled eggs, and small slices of cheese. All pristine, all perfectly symmetrical. A quiet luxury. Nothing too much, but everything just right. The Roman elite liked to pretend they weren't extravagant, while quietly hiring chefs who could make peacock tongues into pate. A child sits cross-legged near the entrance, balancing a flat cake on her knees while whispering to a very unimpressed cat. The cat, naturally, has no interest in baked goods, but it does bat a crumb off the stone floor with regal disdain. Another noble gesture in a world where everyone seems to think they're descended from Jupiter himself. Quirky tidbit. Ancient Roman bakers occasionally stamped loaves of bread with identifying marks, symbols, initials, or the name of the bakery. These stamps were pressed into the dough before baking, turning the loaves into a kind of edible business card. You weren't just eating bread. You were making a statement about where you got it. You chew on that idea for a moment, even as the scenery shifts again, back toward the outskirts now, where the houses thin and the fields stretch wide under a drowsy sun. A shepherd ambles past, dragging a bundle behind him, his sandals more holes than sole. He's chewing something. It looks like a wild herb, maybe fennel or celery leaves. You wave, and he grins with teeth that have definitely seen better eras. In his other hand, a pouch of dried chickpeas. He offers one, and you crunch it between your molars. Salty, nutty, slightly smoky. Breakfast on the move, if ever there was one. You pass an orchard where someone's laid out apples to dry. Their skins are wrinkled from the heat, turning leathery and sweet in the sun. The smell of fermenting fruit tickles your nose, and a wasp circles lazily. You grab one apple slice. Just one. For research purposes. It's the kind of bite that dissolves slowly, the flavor both sharp and mellow, like a memory of something sweeter. As the afternoon leans forward, the city behind you fades into soft echo. You realize now just how many versions of breakfast you've encountered today, how many tastes, textures, and habits coexisted under one empire. From the garlic-heavy stews to delicate honey cakes, from greasy vendor fare to noble fruit trays, breakfast was a window into Roman life, a surprisingly revealing one. It wasn't just about what people ate. It was about who they were, how they worked, where they lived, and how they wanted to be seen. Food was sustenance, of course, but it was also signal, statement, sometimes even a strategy. And here you are now, drifting through all of it like a ghost with excellent taste buds. Your breath smells faintly of figs, your hands are dusted with flour, and your heart, okay, most of your stomach, is content. You find a stone wall and sit. The sun is warm against your back. You close your eyes, and the scent of rosemary lingers. You remember the olive vendor, the soup-slurping workers, the silent bakers stamping loaves in the dark, all of them starting their days in small, flavorful ways. And you're almost at the end of this journey. You stretch your legs out now, toes brushing wild thyme growing between the stones, and take one last look toward the hills. The city hum fades behind you. The dust, the chatter, the baked morning chaos, all of it softens into a background lull, like the closing credits of a particularly savory dream. The air here is still and golden. A donkey brays somewhere distant, as if to say, hope you liked the breakfast tour. You did. You really did. But you're not done quite yet. There's one last thread to pull before you finally rest. One more bite, not from the table, but from the past itself. Because, see, food doesn't disappear after it's eaten. It lingers in the stories, in the soil, in the minds of those who prepare it day after day. And Roman breakfast? Oh, it left a long trail of breadcrumbs. Let's talk legacy. Mainstream historical fact. Many elements of the Roman diet, especially its early morning habits, influenced culinary patterns in later European cultures. The simplicity of their breakfasts, bread, fruit, cheese, and wine, carried forward into medieval and even modern traditions across the Mediterranean. That hunk of bread you ate this morning in Florence probably had a Roman grandfather. You walk now through a shaded grove where wild fennel grows in thick, unruly stalks. The scent is unmistakable, bright and anise-like, almost sweet. Romans believed in the medicinal properties of these herbs. Fennel for digestion, honey for wounds, wine for everything else. It wasn't breakfast unless it could also fix your spine. You pause by a stone wall half swallowed by vines. A carving in Latin reads something like, "To my beloved Livia, may she always have fresh bread." It's not a grand tomb or a monument, just a personal marker, a whisper of affection preserved in stone. That's the kind of breakfast tribute that stays with you. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of the empire, breakfast offerings were buried with the dead. Loaves, cakes, even small amphorae of wine or oil were placed in tombs to nourish the spirit on its journey. Romans were nothing if not practical. You might not need a passport in the afterlife, but by Jupiter, you'd better have a snack. You imagine a ghost nibbling toast in the Elysian fields and smile. Historians still argue whether Iron Tactum was truly a structured, universally observed meal across all Roman classes, or more an informal ritual that varied widely between regions and eras. The evidence is fragmentary. Mentions in letters, scribbles in market ledgers, the occasional satirical jab in poetry. But maybe that's part of the charm. It wasn't a rule. It was a rhythm. You continue walking, the path narrowing now as it threads between olive trees. A breeze picks up. It carries with the faintest scent of baking barley, and just beyond a small bend, you spot the remains of a rustic villa. The stones are low, the mosaic shattered, but in one corner, there's still a recognizable oven, half buried in moss but unmistakable. You kneel beside it, brush your fingers across its edge. Someone used this once, lit kindling, waited for the heat to settle just right, baked the bread that might have fed a mason or a midwife or a moody teenager with dreams of gladiator glory. The crusts are long gone, but the memory clings. You take a deep breath. It smells like old wood, warm earth, a ghost of grain. You close your eyes, and in that moment, you're not just in the past. You're in someone's morning. You're part of their table, their ritual, their hopes, their hunger. Your feet move again, back up the path, back toward the realm of now. But you carry something with you, not just stories or facts or fig-stained fingertips. You carry the quiet understanding that even the smallest meals can speak volumes. That something as simple as breakfast, overripe fruit, slightly stale bread, eggs on a crack plate, can hold the full weight of a culture, the pulse of a people, their resilience, their humor, their flavor, and maybe, if you're lucky, a lesson or two about how to start the day gently, with your feet on the floor and your heart just a little more full than before. So now, as the sun dips low and the birds quiet down for their own version of dinner, you can let go of this ancient kitchen, this Roman city, this long, fragrant morning. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften, like dough resting under a linen cloth. The voices fade. The footsteps retreat. Even the smell of garlic and honey begins to drift away like steam from a cooling pot. You're no longer walking cobbled streets or ducking under market awnings or trying to decipher which olive oil goes with which cheese. You're just here breathing, listening, letting your body sink into stillness like flour into water. The world doesn't always need to be chased or analyzed or explained. Sometimes it just needs to be tasted, savored, held gently in the palms of your imagination, like a warm slice of bread fresh from a fire. So tonight, don't worry about the lost recipes or the missing ruins, or whether you remembered every name, every fact, every flavor. All of that will wait. The story will still be here tomorrow. For now, just rest. Let the comfort of ancient breakfast linger in your thoughts, like a whisper of spice. Let your dreams carry you not through battles or empires, but through quiet kitchens and sunlit gardens, where someone is always just pulling bread from the oven. Breathe in, breathe out, and drift with crumbs on your shirt and a little Roman honey in your soul into the deepest, sweetest sleep.